All right, my friends, welcome back. Chandra Zas, Zen Odyssey for a food and mood adventure. Okay, today, I want to do Mythbuster number 4, healthy food doesn't taste good. Booey, yucky, healthy food, doesn't taste that good. It's no fun. I don't enjoy healthy food. These are like the things that I hear common. It's like a shared belief that healthy food just doesn't taste very good. So I want to dive into this topic and help you understand why you have this thought, or why we all share this thought that healthy food doesn't taste good. And in order to understand why we think this, we have to understand the brain. We have to understand where dopamine comes from, and that healthy food tasting good has a lot to do with the dopamine in our brain. When we eat food that gives us a big dopamine hit, we have this experience of a high amount of dopamine in our body that we associate with tasting good and feeling good. We are wired to go towards dopamine and to avoid things that are painful, that might inhibit our survival, and to go towards things that will help our survival. So dopamine, we are wired for food to taste good because eating is something that helps us survive. We're also wired, our brain is wired to notice and track where food sources are. When we were hunter-gatherers, we were tracking where the berry bush was and when it was in season and when to circle back there and gather food from that source. And now our brains haven't totally caught up to our current modern culture of food, of abundance, of packaged food, of being able to get food anytime, anywhere, as much as we want. It's a whole new thing. So that part of our brain that tracked where that berry bush was in that certain season and notes it in our brain as important and something to pay attention to, now we're like on overload and we're able to track where the biggest dopamine hit is. And the biggest dopamine hit happens from man-made foods. So foods like flour and sugar and processed foods and calorie-dense foods, and even like oils, trans fats. Like our brain gets this like flood of dopamine, like far more than the berry bush. We get this, or the roots in the ground, or the grains, or the seeds that we find. Our brain is like, wait a minute, we can get this huge amount of dopamine from these foods, so these must be the most important foods, because the more I need food to survive and the more food I can eat, then the more likely I am to survive. But the problem is in our current culture, we have an overabundance of food, and our brain doesn't really know how to compute that and how to take that into the calculation when it's urging us to eat foods. And so when we're urgently urged to eat man-made foods like sugar, we get into this cycle of overeating these foods that are not necessarily healthy for us. Let me slow down and go backwards a little bit. So let's go back to the berry bush. So these berries, when we find them in the wild and we eat them off of the bush, we eat them while they're in season, we eat them a couple times a year, and we eat, handfuls or whatever, and we eat them in their whole form with all of their fiber. And when we eat them this way, the insulin levels are stable, it's something rare and occasional, and so we get kind of the flood of antioxidants that are needed seasonally. And this is really healthy to eat a bowl full or even bowls full of berries occasionally when it happens in season. But then we figured out how to cultivate berries. And then we figured out how to juice berries, which we get even more dopamine from the juice of berries because it hits our glucose levels and hits our dopamine levels and floods us with this amount of pleasure. Oh my gosh, the juice is just so much better than the berry, right? Because you get more glucose, more dopamine from the juice. And then we figured out how to preserve and package the berries, the juice, and then we even added some sugar into it to make it taste extra good. And also to make up for if the berries aren't totally ripe or they're not totally perfect, you add a little sugar and then the dopamine hit is really strong. And this is where the really big problem comes in, is when we add that sugar, we add a really large dose of dopamine to the berries. And instead of experiencing the berries at a pleasure of 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, we experience the berry juice with sugar at a level of 10. And so this juice with sugar in it has a dopamine hit, a really large dopamine hit of a very high level that our brain has categorized as far more important than the original form of the berries. The problem with this is that when we add sugar to the juice, we are messing with the chemical compounds of it, and it has negative effects on our body. Sugar, there's no upside to sugar. There's no nutrients, and I'm talking white processed sugar or high fructose corn syrup or any of the man-made sugars. There's no benefit to our body. The only thing that happens is we get a big dopamine hit in our brain of pleasure, and then we think that it's really, really important. But sugar actually has a lot of negative health impact on our body. It spikes insulin levels, which makes our weight fluctuate. It makes our sugar levels go crazy. We have sugar crashes and sugar highs. And it messes with our hormones, it messes with our skin, and oftentimes we're also not eating healthy foods that actually our bodies need to maintain and heal and replenish and feed our bodies. So a lot of people get stuck in like eating only sugars and actually neglecting to eat a lot of other important foods. And then the sugars, on top of that, they're feeding all the bad guys in our body. They're feeding the yeast, the fungi, the bacteria. They're feeding the diseases. They're feeding cancers. Like sugar is like one of the worst things that all of us can eat, but we're hooked on it because it tastes so good, because our dopamine is so high when we eat that sugar. So back to the myth buster. Healthy food, like these bowl of berries, don't taste as good. We don't get the dopamine hit as we do from this juice with sugar in it. All right, so how do I bust this myth? First, I give you all this information of how bad it is for you. Then I tell you, so in order for these berries to taste really good, which is what my experience of a bowl full of berries is, and my little one's experience of a bowl full of berries, I love berries. They taste incredible to me. But in order to get from this level 10 to this level 5 tasting good, and this level 5 is like the natural pleasures, it's the real whole foods, we have to go through a period of down-regulating off of these big dopamine hitters back to this level of 5. You can even think of it like cocaine. Like when we take a drug, we have just this surge of pleasure. And so if you think of sugar as this surge of pleasure, that's what's happening in the brain. And to get off of it, it's kind of like getting off of a drug. You have to go through a little bit of withdrawal. You have to downregulate your dopamine receptors. You kind of go through this grumpy, not really feeling very good period before the berries start to taste amazing, because they really can't compete with man-made sugar. So it's a little bit of a hard sell. It's not the most, it's not a one to like, of course, it takes understanding the reasons behind it, why sugar is such a hook and such an addiction. You have to understand it. You have to get part of your brain on board to understand the negative impacts of it. And then you have to go through the withdrawal period, the down-regulating period, where it's not very fun and comfortable. But on the other side, when we're off of these big dopamine hitters, when we're off of the unhealthy foods, healthy food starts to taste really amazing. It starts to taste really good. And I would not trade healthy food for junk food any day these days. But I remember what it's like to be really on junk food and really on sugar and looking for the fix and thinking about my next sugar thing and having sugar in my purse. I remember what that's like. But to be out the other side and feel stable hormones, to feel stable moods, to have my skin look really good, to have my gut function really on point is really, this is where the long-term reward is. This is where the buy-in for me really happens, is like looking at the big picture. Sure, I don't get the crazy pleasure of a 10, but I get the long-term pleasure of really feeling good, of really having, like, emotionally feeling good, mentally feeling good, feeling really stable, my weight being stable. It's really a big game changer. And so for me, I associate, when I feel that zing of sugar, I associate that with like, oh, here's that hook again. Here's that roller coaster ride. And when I eat that really nutritious, really good, wholesome food that has that level of 5, for me, it's this like upward. It's like, ooh, yeah, it tastes good. I'm going to feel good. And it's like a slow, long uphill. I guess it's an uphill. And what's really cemented it for me is my little one. What I know, I studied a lot of gut health for the last couple decades, and I did a teeny bit of research to figure out how what I knew applied to kids. And kids, their guts are just forming. And so the way to treat a baby's and a kid's gut system is that it's kind of like building, and it's even repairing, like in my Heal Your Gut program, where we do a big repairing phase. You really want to set it up. You want to build the foundation for a really solid digestion. And what is one of the most important things to solid digestion? Not eating sugar. And so I kind of doubled down with my beliefs in sugar, and it's sometimes awkward in making sure that she doesn't get sugar. And sometimes people want to offer her sugar, and it's a little bit of a thing. But what I see in her stability, her moods, she's able to really feel a lot healthier in her body, which makes her an easier kid. And it also, she's able to feel better more often. She's able to control herself more, and it makes such a big difference in our health. And thinking about her and like wanting to set her up for her best life possible, like that's what every parent wants, right? So I know about gut function, so I've really tuned into her diet, making sure that her diet was really spot on and sets her up for her best health possible in her life. And I kind of was like looking at like, okay, well, if these are the choices that I'm really into for her, why wouldn't I like double down even more for me? Because I want to set myself up for the best future possible and for the best health possible. And so the teeny bit of chocolate that I was eating with a little bit of sugar, or the little bit of hippie sugar, it made me even double down even more. If I'm not willing to feed it to her, if I don't think it's good for her, why would I eat it for me? And so it's made me even more solid in my sugar avoidance and my sugar regulation and my choices to really invest in. And we spend the extra money on buying berries. We buy berries for her often, and she loves them. All right, so Mythbuster number 4, healthy food is not tasty. It's not tasty because we're hooked on these high levels of dopamine. When we downregulate, healthy food tastes really amazing. It can feel really good and taste really good. You just got to get through that down regulation and withdrawal phase. Friends, thank you. My program launch is coming up, Heal Your Gut. I would love you to express any interest. Please stay tuned. I'm so excited to offer this, and so excited to get my first batch of public live, not in my prior circle clients. I'm so excited, and I can't wait to find you. So please contact me if you're interested. The process will open, if it's not open right now when this video is airing, it will be opening within the next couple weeks. So please feel free to send me a personal message or make a comment or something. And Zen Odyssey, food and mood, heal your gut. Healthy food can taste amazing. All right, ciao.